I can't hear anything. Are you getting anything your end?
Testing. I can't hear anything.
Aha! No, I see what I've done. I just have to flip that little setting there. Sorry, bear with me. I'll just be one tick.
Hold on. My booth dog just farted. He's gotta go. I'll be right back.
Voice Acting Unplugged.
Hello and welcome to Voice Acting Unplugged, our podcast dedicated to exploring the art and business of voice acting. I'm Margaret Ashley, and I'm here with my co-host, Anthony
Hello,
Bird.
yes,
That's
me. Hello, and we're joined today by a legend in the conversational voiceover world, Mr. Hugh Klitzke, who you can find at conversationalvo.com. He spent nearly 15 years as the voiceover studio manager at Buckwald in New York. He's been a coach and director for 18 plus years and has directed 125,000 plus sessions. That's quite a lot. Hello, Hugh.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you for joining us.
It's
wonderful
auditions.
to have you with us.
Thank you.
It's auditions, is it?
It sounds like you're saying, like if they were an hour each for a session, 125,000 hours. I don't think we have 125,000 hours in our lifetime of waking hours.
It's certainly a long time. It's still a lot of auditions, mind you.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot. Good morning from New York. Good afternoon to Great Britain. Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so much
I'm
for coming.
I'm glad you pronounced, is it Buckwald or Buchwald?
In New York, Don called it Buckwald.
Buckwald.
Yeah,
okay.
The same way that my last name is in America pronounced Klitzke, and in Germany, it's not.
Oh, okay. So what is, for my chums in the UK, what is Buckwald?
It's a talent agency in Manhattan.
Okay.
Well, actually, I was in their New York office for about 15 years, but they do have a Los Angeles office as well.
Yeah.
So Don passed away last year, but he put in place, he wanted the business to thrive and survive beyond him. His daughter has taken over. So they're, I'm sure still reeling from that, but he was a terrific boss. It was a great place to learn, a great place to work for.
So why did you leave?
To go out on my own, I began to think about, I kind of got an itch to see if there was more for myself out there. I actually wrote a story about it, put it up on my site, and I talked to my father about it. And I was saying to him how I don't know, I love what I do, but I'm just not sure, and he was like, well, you might get a different kind of satisfaction working with people for a deeper, richer, longer period of time than the few minutes you have at a moment as you're seeing 60, 70, as many as 89 people in a day. And that's where that big number comes from. And he was right. Ultimately, he was right. I was teaching classes, as you do when you would call it work at agencies or things like that. But the pivot to going completely solo was something I thought about deeply for a long time. And then only after I left, did I learn that there's a small trend among people at the age I was then, where it becomes, you have enough time to change if you apply yourself in a specific way. I heard that talked about in interviews with a bunch of different folks and a bunch of different career paths, that you could be mid-career and you basically have a choice. You either kind of double down where you are, or you follow that little voice that says, what if I pivoted over into something else? Because you do have that time. It didn't involve me going back and getting another degree, for example, but that wasn't outside the realm of possibility. So all of those thoughts, it kind of concretized the validity of my choice after the fact. Now, COVID hit, and then that threw my world up in the air because I'd just gone out on my own and COVID happened. And, that had me rethinking all of my life choices at that moment, because I live in New York City. We were at the epicenter of things. So that was a very, it was a dark time. It was a dark time to try to be in that, what is that phrase? They say the wandering in the desert phase,
Sure.
But on the other side of it, I was grateful enough to meet, and I'm very grateful to have met the folks that I have who have invited me into certain niches, who also said, I think you'd be good at doing this. Why don't you give this a go? And then the voiceover community itself, which is known for being generous of spirit and kind, took to me and said, I think you have something to offer. And that was very gratifying after being in the small but very deep world of the agency universe, to go out into the broader world of the non-union voiceover work and to begin to thrive in that space. And I'm very grateful to all of the folks that chose to accept me and to encourage me and do still do so.
Sure. Going back even further, how did you first go? You've got a very long CV with all kinds of things like music writing for film and so on.
Yeah.
What made you decide that voice acting was the way forward?
It was purely opportunity. It was just purely opportunity. That story goes that I was scoring somebody's film and he didn't have a budget to pay me. And I said to the guy, all right, I understand. It was also that kind of film. It was an art film, like post film school kind of film. Nothing wrong with it. I enjoyed working on the film, but I said to him, look, if you can't afford to pay me, people do me favors. We barter, right? And I said to him, now, I don't know if you can help me with this, but I'm looking to, I need a better day job than the one I have because my day job sucks. At the time, I was selling cell phones at Radio Shack.
Okay.
I had, my father had just come out of the hospital after a long-term stay and he was learning to walk again. All my freelance work had dried up. And then it's October and Radio Shack has an open house and I just show up and get hired and I'm spending the Christmas season, learning how to hawk, sell, mobiles, you guys call them, on commission. And so I was casting about trying to find anything at that point, right? Because of the nature of work and all those kinds of things. And this guy whose film I was scoring, he looked at me dead in the face and he says, all right, that's fine. What about my old job? I said, I don't know what you do. And it turned out that he was my predecessor at the agency. So he set me up for an interview. He set me up for an interview. I got interviewed at 9 a.m. on a Friday. And the woman that, ultimately became my boss for those 15 years, I got a call from her office at 3 p.m. and they offered me the job. And I said, well, that's amazing. Thank you so much. What am I going to do now? Because I knew nothing about the work. I didn't know anything about the industry, nothing, that way. I've never been a voice actor. I am not one. And I, was trained on site and I discovered that I had a set of skills that were transferable into the, into this particular job. And I found it was work that I enjoyed. Most of my predecessors lasted for about a year to 18 months. And I stayed for almost 15 years.
Wow. Okay. So just your speciality is very much conversational voiceover. It's something that seems to be getting more and more prevalent in the voiceover world. When did it first start becoming a necessity in the industry, would you say?
That's interesting because I was asked this recently on an interview. It really goes back, the first indications of it to me, anyway, that I've encountered, go back to 1984. Go back to a particular political campaign in 1984 for the re-election of President Ronald Reagan. And there was one particular campaign called Morning in America. And it was written and read by a fellow named Hal Riney. So Riney did not read very many commercials. He only read maybe a half a dozen total, maybe 2 total for the Reagan campaign. But it was such a different kind of presentation. It became, as I understand it, it became an archetype in the industry, at least on the West Coast, where they began to refer to it as the Riney read. You go and the beauty of YouTube is you can go and listen to all these examples. So you just Google Morning in America, Reagan, and it comes up on YouTube and you can hear it. Where it's a very, very much we would put words on it now like emotional. We would put on it words like subdued. We would put on it ideas around perhaps supporting the image. We would put on it the idea of perhaps commenting, but not too much. It was a very, very different approach, especially in the political space, because in the political space, very traditional, it was very, very big and very, very bombastic and very, very attention. And the fact that it had become a name unto itself, where it became the Rainy Reed, I think moves that identity into a different part of the professional consciousness, where it became a shorthand and people really understood what that was. Then he did another one for Reagan also around, there's a bear in the woods. And the bear actually was obviously a metaphor for the Cold War, for Russia at the time. Also read it similarly, but just different enough that you understood there was a underlying threat. Same performer, same subtlety of tone, but you could hear one was very uplifting, Morning in America, also moving through a series of different emotions in Morning for America, ending with a question that has a bit of a challenge in the script, around, now that we've come this far, why would we want to go back? Is the end of Morning in America, as opposed to There's a Bear in the Woods, where, the narrator is saying there's a bear in the woods. At least we think there is. But shouldn't we be strong and safe if there is a bear? It's a very subtle kind of narrative, leaving the listener and the audience hanging a little bit, but thinking. And to me, that supports the shorthand I've come up with the idea that announcer reads are reads of presentation, as opposed to conversational reads, which are reads of interpretation.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Then, in the early 2000s, I think the MasterCard reads with Billy Crudup were another big, big sea change, where they were taking that particular character, that particular voice actor, nice guy, Crudup, and really moving that identity through a whole series of different kinds of reads, about MasterCard Priceless. And that campaign ran for a very, very long time, as opposed to the Riney things, which were much shorter, much smaller. But the MasterCard campaign, they were putting him through all kinds of paces and all kinds of interpretations, but still around that same identity of MasterCard Priceless. To me, that's another kind of conversational read, another form of interpretation, leaning into character, but not quite charactery. Close. It's become a cliche, again, in a different way. The MasterCard or Priceless, it was satirized, all these different kinds of things. And I remember the first podcast interview I ever did, there was an actor in there before me doing another episode, because I'd never done one. So I wanted to see one of the guys that were hosting it, said, come in early, watch somebody else do it. And I said, oh, sure. And I watched him do it, and he talked about his work and said, he said aloud, I think guys like Crudup doing MasterCard opened up the space for me to come in and allowed me to use my skills as an actor first and applying those to voiceover.
Yeah.
And so it's the interpretation of script is a big part of what I focus on, I think in large part because that's where I came from. I came from the agency world where I was directing actors who did voiceover as opposed to voiceovers who were doing voiceover. So my focus came out of me asking a very simple question when people would come to wanting to coach with me. Would say, what are you looking for in a coach? And I was very surprised at the number of people who directly said to me, you know what? Never quite been able to land the conversation. And many of them had made excellent livings doing all kinds of stuff, audiobooks or promos or medical narration or any of the more traditional kinds of voice work that way, where you were delivering the whole audio as opposed to an actor coming in and being a portion of the product, which then was put into a greater whole. They tended to be actors who did voiceover. Then suddenly I wanted to respond to that. And then I said, okay, if there's demand for the conversational coaching, let me create conversationalvo.com. It was available. And then that became my niche and my focus. Because what I focus on is taking voice actors that are more established at times, or who have struggled with it specifically, and said, Let me understand where you're at. Now let me, coach you and advise you around getting to conversational from that basic precept of interpretation, not just presentation.
That's what I was about to say. How do you differentiate? If you've got very seasoned voice actors who want to learn that approach, how would your approach change to those who are just coming into the industry?
That's a real challenge. Some people have said that my work focuses on the working professional almost exclusively. And some have even gone so far as to say, you're the guy that talks to somebody 2 and 3 years into their work, into their career. And I do agree with them. I'm not the guy to take you from zero to hero. I just don't have a curriculum around working with the absolute beginner saying, I've never done voiceover before. Will you coach me, Hugh? And to which I say to them, I am not the coach for you. I will send you to, my good friends, who do that and focus on that only because I don't have a curriculum in the private space to take you, from nothing to something. Because I'm very niche focused, in the idea of how do you apply conversational to commercial? How do you apply it to promo? How do you apply conversational to various kinds of narration or e-learning or all these different spaces that are becoming more and more conversational for all different kinds of reasons? How do I do it? I have people directly read for me. When they sign up on my consultation calendar, I give them the scripts and I hear what they're doing. And then I talk to them about the prosody of their read. And then I talk to them about how to adjust that prosody specifically. But then also I go into, if they choose to study with me, then we go more deeply and I ask them, now, how do you get to where you are with your work, right? What do you think about when you look at a script for the first time? And then I begin to talk with them and say, if you consider a script in these other ways, what effect does that in turn have on your performance?
Okay, does the conversational read evolve regularly, or is it a skill that you can learn that will forever keep you in good stead?
It's both. I think it's both, really. I don't think it's a sound. I think it's more of a practice. I think it's more because even going back to that 1984 read, that wouldn't really fly now, right? It's not really about marrying a very specific sound to the work. I think it's about really trying to understand what emotions are there, and in turn also understanding the result that is being asked for. You guys in Britain hit it right on the head when you guys describe it as tone. The tone that's requested, as opposed to in the States where we call it direction, right? I think that's a misnomer. I really do, because it's very contradictory psychologically to say, I want this result, when the psychology of interpretation is saying, okay, I want to understand what's going on and hopefully get to a particular tone that you're looking for, a particular sound. And actors traditionally are not taught to present with a tone. They're taught to interpret. So I go back to one of your countrymen, Ian McKellen. I found online this great video of him in a workshop in 1979. Cuts right into the video. It's a VHS somewhere that somebody transferred, and I'm grateful to whoever it is that did it. And Ian is there, saying, I hope, if anything, this workshop has scotched the idea that Shakespeare's verse is music. And once you find the melody, everything will be all right. Rather, I believe, he says, once you find the sense of the words, their sounds will look after themselves. I stopped the video and I'm like, that's it. That's everything I want to say. That's it. Yeah. He does it in 2 sentences. He does it in 2 sentences so eloquently, so specifically. And then you press play again, and then the man proceeds to disassemble the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow monologue, right, from a textual standpoint, which is a lot of what I do with people, if that's what they need. Not everybody needs that. Some people just need to focus on the prosody, which is very different than just looking at the text and allowing the text to inform the emotions of your performance. But he then also says, I also let the direction inform my work. I let the staging inform my work, and the costuming and the lighting and the conflict. And I'm sitting there going, Ian, that's awesome. Yay, congratulations. We don't have that in voiceover. You don't have all of those things, especially in the audition process. So a lot of that then becomes, creating that in the theater of the mind and trusting that what you choose, what you begin to see and think about in your head, the way that you get there will have its effect upon your performance to inform that comprehension, especially if it's not.
I was sent something from TikTok the other day, and it was somebody saying, if you want to get on with the kids in advertising, this is how you need to talk.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't understand a word he said. And so
sometimes I don't understand my nieces and nephews.
Well, I mean, so can you see a trend happening whereby that conversational read can go more modern, down with the kids, if you like?
Absolutely. Yeah. We talk about being down with the kids as if it's a pejorative. I don't believe that. I believe that people want to be spoken to in a way that they're understood. There's a marketing guru here in the States named Seth Godin, and one of his precepts is people like us do things like this. And I'm thinking that makes perfect sense. Why? Because I don't want somebody in their early 20s trying to talk to me about the way to reorganize my 401k. I don't want that. I want to hear somebody who understands where I'm at, my needs to do that. And I want to trust in that, the casting of that voice to speak to me about those things, as opposed to somebody in their early 20s, mid 20s, late, because my nieces and nephews are now in their early 30s, late 20s, but they don't have kids yet. So they're more apt to what? Things online, to maybe understand things in a different way in the niches of the internet. They want to be spoken to in that way that makes sense to them. Hence that different read, hence that need to interpret. So again, it's the fascinating combination of both casting and content, and then the presentation and the emotional relationship to those things. Here's the interesting part. When I look at influencer videos, especially on TikTok and things like that, where it's very obviously a sales read, a sales script, or a sales presentation of some kind of commercial, for lack of a better term, if you transcribe that word for word, you're not changing the writing. The writing itself is almost exactly the same as it's been since the 1980s, let's say, creating the 15 and 30-second advert, as you guys call it. Why? Because those ideas have to be heard once and understood immediately with no takebacks. But it's the way that those ideas are expressed and talked about that is different.
That's where it came across, because I had to look at the comments to find out what was being said. And the words were perfectly legible, but I couldn't hear them coming out of his mouth.
Challenge. That's the challenge. And that is desirable because in that market, that market is so acutely aware of falsehood, of being sold to. And when I read those comments in there, it's amazing to me how many of them decry the use of AI, say another AI voice. I tuned out immediately. I'm just here to comment. Or they're even talking about AI writing coming into Reddit, where they're saying, oh, great, another AI comment, leading this thread. Well, this is, am I allowed to swear? I'm sorry.
Of course you can.
More AI bullshit, talking about this scenario in order to get clicks. Great. Great. I'm out. It's, and it reeks of a kind of inauthenticity that is, quickly being derided at length.
I don't think people like being talked to by a robot. I just don't think they do.
They don't. It's fascinating because the novelty of it is wearing incredibly thin, incredibly quick. The business models aren't supporting it.
I think it's worse when they feel that they've been duped as well.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's taken them 5 minutes to work out it's not a human.
Oh, yeah. Or even to suspect that it's not human.
Again, though, that's the word you just used. We're looking for authenticity. Right. And that's the big word in the profession at the moment. People want the authentic, real voice.
That's another adjective I throw around the coaching that I use, the authentic conversational. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the difference then between a conversation and a conversational read?
In a conversation, you have something to react to. Conversational read, you have to sound like you're reacting to something, even if there's no other person in dialogue with you. That's one of the beauties of pre-life. Pre-life itself, those little manufactured improvised bits that a lot of voice talent put up in front of their script reads, right? That done well can actually turn a script into your side of a conversation.
Oh, I see. Yeah, of course.
It's part of the challenge. It's one of the many challenges of trying to make, commercial scripts, sound like your side of a chat. It's very difficult, but first point, right? The difference between a conversation and conversational. In a conversation, you can react to something. So the pre-life, right? Everybody knows what pre-life is, right? You guys may have different words for it. It's
the bit before the conversation.
Right. Sometimes it's called pre-life or a lead-in. I sometimes call it a cognitive frame, right? All those ideas around who am I talking to? And then all the notions around, I always try to encourage my students to go deeper to make it. It's not about talking to a friend. It's about talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That specific friend. Right? I have two best friends. One's a man and one's a woman. Do you think I talk to them about the same things?
No, of course not.
Right. One is married.
Unless you're talking to them together.
But I think they've only met each other like once. I think it was at my mother's funeral, actually. So one is married on her second marriage and very happy and thrilled, right? And my best friend, who's a guy, he's never been married. So they both have very, very different perspectives. I would talk to them about very, very different things. Hence the idea of it's not a friend and it's not even a best friend. It's about that friend. And
you have to get an absolute picture of that person in your mind.
I think so, because you get the subtlety, the authenticity from being as specific as you possibly can. Go back to, Ian's point around Shakespeare, right? We think about those characters specifically, and then we interpret those characters very specifically. We're not sitting there just thinking about them as archetypes, as heroes. They've become that, right? But we're thinking about them very specifically. And then that becomes a place for you to add, your ideas around love, your ideas around support, your ideas around compassion, your ideas around appreciation, the way that you understand it. And then in turn, we hear that. And that emotional authenticity is the thing that we're paying for. So that indifference that you hear sometimes in the quote, the modern read, and a lot of it is because a lot of those, influencers, they know perfectly well, hey, here's my time to actually have to sell something. Okay. Unless they actually do believe in it. And then they'll actually speak to it to say, this is a thing that I found. It's really cool. I like it. Let me see if, maybe you'll like it too,
Going back to Ian McKellen and Shakespeare. Shakespeare's words were the modern conversational language of the time. Today's rapper or TikTok speakers, the way they speak in language that I don't understand half the time, is the same thing, but just in today's modern youth terminology. So it's just conversation.
I think so.
He did make up some words as well, though, didn't he?
So do we all, right? So do we all when Americans contract, right? And the idea of Margaret, you were kind enough to say you appreciated my outfit, right? My clothes. Well, sometimes that's called in the States. It's sometimes called a fit. The contraction of outfit to just fit, where you say, "Ooh, I like your fit." Right? Now that has a whole different connotation to it, right? Because we then could associate the idea of fit to say, oh, that fits you well. but also it's referring to your outfit. Therefore, it's referring to two things at once, while then it becomes something that you can lean into emotionally. But it's also a word that has a whole new connotation. Therefore, the word is essentially made up. It's also like the idea of the word riz, to say that, oh, he's got riz. That is a contraction of charisma. Yeah. But the way the word then feels in the mouth to say riz, right, has a whole different connotation to it, as opposed to the more arch, perhaps, feeling of charisma. So I think the kids are all right. I think that language evolves and expression evolves organically. And I think that we're not used to hearing it because there's a point where we do become programmed to say, this is the way I'm used to being talked to, right? So talk to me in a language that I understand. It takes a bit of a cognitive and emotional leap to say, oh, they're talking a different way. Let me try to understand. Yeah. Not to mimic it and not to ape it and not to necessarily duplicate it, but to understand it and then in turn appreciate it.
Sure. So things are going to evolve always. But do you think we're looking at a future where, heaven knows, we may be saying and in commercial reads? Or is that never going to happen?
That happens sometimes already, depending on what's going on in the market. Right. I think that is... I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. I think it can it can present the idea that the speaker is taking that moment to gather their thoughts. And if they're gathering their thoughts, they're leaning towards clarity. And so that and that in small doses, can lead to a certain kind of genuine rapport on the part of towards the listener. To say, I want to say this the right way. Let me think.
So to sum up, a conversational read is you speaking to one specific person genuinely, authentically, and believably.
I think so. I think that's, a good textbook definition of it. Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a textbook in my head.
I think that's it's a read of it's where you're looking at a script and I'm trying and internalizing what's going on with it so fluently. People are unaware of the inauthenticity of the words. The language is intensely inauthentic, right? I think that Shakespeare is, to a certain extent, very inauthentic as well, because when you look at the very beginnings of the acts and things like that, where they're standing there reprising all of those portions of the story, that's because the audience was settling down after buying beer. And, Will knew that, okay, I got to get everybody's attention. Give me a couple minutes for some recap here before we move on with the narrative, right? Because he knew that was the only way that he was going to, keep his company alive, was to sell seats and also to sell merch. It sounds
Absolutely.
and that merch was often just beer, straight up and down, right? So, there's a whole deep logic to it, and everything old is new again. We're going back several centuries there.
Wonderful stuff. Hugh, it's been amazing to talk to you. Where do people find you? Where's the best place to go for people to look you up?
I am online at conversationalvo.com. You can jump on there and check out I have two things on there that I love giving away for free. There's the free consultations, where people can book out 20 minutes of my time and have a private chat with me if they're interested in finding out more about the work that I do. Specifically, you get scripts in advance, and then you'll read from me, and we'll chat a bit about the work that way. I also have a free series that I call the Conversational Open Studio, which I started in the fall and has been very successful. I've been so happy with it, where people get to come in as a large group, again for free, and watch a private coaching session.
That sounds amazing.
Is that online
it's
or
it's
in
online?
your studio?
It's online. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. People, right now they're maxing out at 100 seats, and they do sell out, very quickly, but it's free, right? It's completely free. There's no selling out involved. But the notion is that I think it is a great advantage to watch one person be coached very deep as opposed to having, a bit of input here, a bit of input there. It's a very different kind of experience. And a number of my voiceover friends, all students, were brave enough to get up and say, okay, Hugh, I'll let you coach me for half an hour in front of people. And then we did it. And it was very, very successful. And since then, it's been fascinating, the number of people who have heard about it and said, I can't do it. I love coming, but I can't get coached live in front of people. It's just too personal for me. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. Because some people I've known who have had very big personalities and have said, yeah, I would rather drink a bottle of Drano than do that. And I'm like, fascinating. Okay. All right. So, but other people are like, rubbing their hands, just like, bring it. Let's do it.
I've got to say,
it's great to have other people tell you things and for you to learn things about you.
I had a brief session with you with Brad Shaw a few months ago, and I can personally heartily recommend you because I understood. I don't know. You talk about it in such a way that it's much easier for me to understand than other coaches I've had down the years. So I do heartily recommend you take a visit to conversationalvo.com and check out Hugh yourself and see if he may be a fit for training you into the next generation of conversational voiceover. Thank you so much.
And sign up for his newsletter.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming.
No, thank you both very much. This was a great way to start the day. I appreciate it.
Wonderful.
Oh, yes, it's early morning there. It must be, 10 o'clock there now. Time for your cup of coffee.
Yeah, my third. I am a New Yorker after all, we know.
Yeah. Well, I've got my cup of herbal tea coping with my cold. Anyway, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you. And if everybody that's been listening has enjoyed it and want to hear more and see more of our guests, then do hit the subscribe button and leave us a review and let us know your thoughts.
Thanks very much indeed for coming and listening to the Voice Acting Unplugged podcast. We've got all of the web addresses at the bottom of the page for you to look at, and you'll be able to find Hugh down there as well. So do check that out. Do subscribe. Come back next week. We'll have more exciting and thrilling adventures in the world of voice acting.
And us.
Cheers. Thank you for listening.
See you then.
Take care.
Bye-bye.